Commas. Number 5. Actually, it's not that complicated. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to interrupt yourself politely using commas and a few other punctuation devices. So the way that you interrupt yourself is to introduce some clarifying information, usually a definition or a set of dates, something a little extra that you think your reader is going to need in order to understand what you're talking about. So here we have an example from our evolving paragraph. The American Culture Wars, comma, spanning from 1980 through the early 90s, comma, killed sampling culture. So you can see that the extra information that we're adding is in white. And we've punctuated this on both sides using the same punctuation. In the first instance, we've used commas. In the second instance, we've used em dashes. And in the third instance, we've used parentheses, or colloquially, brackets. You have these 3 different choices on your hands when you are interrupting yourself with this bit of extra information. You can use commas, dashes, or parentheses. The way that you choose them is by determining the importance of the information. If the information is just as important, you want your reader to understand it, then use commas. And I've represented this equality between the extra information and the information in the complete sentence through a wavelength that demonstrates that you haven't quieted down or increased the volume of your voice. Right? So we would read this: the American Culture Wars, spanning from 1980 through the early 1990s, killed sampling culture. If what you want to convey with this interruption is that the information is super important, then you want to use em dashes. Em dashes have this effect of shouting the information to your reader, really underscoring it. And so if I can represent this by saying it out loud, this sentence would read like this: the American Culture Wars, spanning from 1980 through the early 1990s, killed sampling culture. So I don't think this instance really deserves em dashes, but you will encounter many instances where you want to really highlight that information, really pack it full of punch, and you want to choose em dashes. The key is that you are using the same punctuation at both sides of the interrupted information, right? You cannot mix and match. You just can't. If you use a comma at the outset, you have to use a comma at the close. Same with dashes and same with parentheses. The rhetorical effect of using parentheses is actually just shushing the information. You're telling your reader, actually, you know what? You can skip this information if you really want to. Think about your experience of reading textbooks. Do you read the information that you're given when it's given in a bracket or a parentheses? Or do you tend to skip over it, thankful that you have that much less to read? So the information really says this to your reader: the American Culture Wars, spanning from 1980 through the early 90s, whatever, killed sampling culture. So if it really doesn't matter, you just want to make sure that it's there, so like your professor knows that you can provide a definition for what you're talking about, then you want to use brackets. So how do you know that you're using this punctuation appropriately and effectively? Well, once again, we can use the finger test and go back to our knowledge of the simple sentence to do a quick test. So if you put your finger over the interrupted phrase and read the rest of the sentence without it, you should end up with a full sentence that you can complete with a full stop. So let's do a test. Here we have the American Culture Wars killed sampling culture. Once again, it's easiest to find our action word, our verb. Here we've got a pretty strong one, killed. Right before it, we should encounter our subject, the American Culture Wars. Yep, that's a subject. It definitely starts with the. We know that it's a noun. And then the rest of our sentence, what did it kill? The object, sampling culture. Could we put a period at the end of this without including any of that additional information? Definitely. One thing to keep in mind with these interruptions is that they should always come right after the thing that you want to comment on in the interruption. So here you see that the interruption is telling us the dates of the American Culture Wars, and so the interruption is coming right after I mention the American Culture Wars. You always want to include the interruption precisely after the thing that the interruption is commenting on. So here's our revised and evolving paragraph with a few of these interruptions inserted. The American Culture Wars, spanning from 1980 through the early 1990s, killed sampling culture. Despite the strong gains for freedom of expression made during the culture wars, A 1991 court decision, written by Judge Kevin Duffy, made all unlicensed sampling illegal. Due to this ruling, sampling multiple tracks became too expensive for most artists. Unfortunately, the ruling had the greatest impact on hip-hop, for sampling is the foundation of hip-hop. Can you find the insertion phrases in this paragraph? There are two of them. The first we've already seen in our example, and it's in the very first sentence. And the second one is actually a bit complicated, and if it wasn't identified in white, you may have missed it altogether. It occurs in the second sentence. And the reason why it's complicated is because it's actually combined with one of the other comma uses that we've learned about in this series, subordination. So we have this phrase, despite the strong gains for freedom of expression made during the culture wars, comma, a 1991 court decision, insertion phrase, written by Judge Kevin Duffy, comma, made all unlicensed sampling illegal. This sentence is grammatical, even though it may be a bit confusing because of the number of commas within it. We're using all of these commas correctly. However, in this instance, it may be necessary to switch our insertion phrase punctuation from commas to brackets. These are your choices. You get to decide what is best, what will make the reader's life easiest. I think I would probably go back and revise this to brackets instead of commas, just to avoid any potential confusion that my reader might experience. Once again, I hope that you're seeing that the increasing use of commas to include information as naturally as possible in our writing helps to increase the fluidity and coherence of our writing and bring the reader from idea to idea or point to point.